By the early 1700s, the 13 British colonies in North America had matured into thriving settlements. Though still part of the British Empire, these colonies had developed their own identities, economies, and cultures, from New England's fishing towns to the plantations of the South. Colonial life was rich, complex, and increasingly independent in spirit. Let's take a closer look at life in these early American colonies. The colonies were grouped into three broad regions, each with distinct characteristics. New England colonies, Massachusetts; New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut; Middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware; Southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. The New England colonies were deeply shaped by religion, especially Puritanism. These colonies featured small towns centered around churches and meeting houses. The rocky soil and harsh winters limited large-scale agriculture, so the economy relied on fishing, shipbuilding, lumber, and trade. Education was highly valued. In fact, Harvard College was established in 1636 to train ministers. The emphasis on literacy was driven by the belief that every person should be able to read the Bible. The Middle colonies were the most diverse, both culturally and religiously. You'd find Dutch, Germans, Swedes, English, and others living side by side. Cities like Philadelphia and New York grew quickly as trade and business centers. The fertile soil supported wheat, corn, and livestock, earning the region the nickname the breadbasket colonies. Religious tolerance was common here, especially in Pennsylvania. Founded by the Quaker William Penn as a haven for peace-loving religious minorities, the South was defined by its plantations and slave-based economy. Crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo dominated. Wealthy landowners ruled over vast estates, while enslaved Africans provided the labor. A strict social hierarchy developed, with planters at the top, small farmers and tradesmen in the middle, and enslaved people at the bottom. In contrast to the tight-knit religious communities of New England, the South was more spread out and hierarchical. Education was often reserved for the elite, while rural life remained difficult and isolated for many. Though loyal to the British Crown, the colonies were remarkably self-governing. Each had its own colonial assembly, often made up of elected representatives. These assemblies managed local issues like taxes, defense, and public infrastructure. Governors, usually appointed by the king, served as the crown's representatives but often clashed with local legislatures. This system bred a sense of autonomy. Colonists became accustomed to making their own laws and decisions. Over time, this spirit of self-governance would clash with the growing interference of the British Parliament. Religion played a central role in colonial life not just spiritually, but politically and socially. In New England, the Puritans enforced strict moral codes. Church membership was often required for political participation. In Pennsylvania, Quakers promoted equality, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence with Native Americans. In Maryland, Catholics found refuge in a Protestant-dominated world. Over time, religious fervor would be revived by a movement known as the First Great Awakening. Charismatic preachers like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards inspired thousands through emotional sermons. This religious revival challenged traditional authority, emphasized personal salvation, and helped foster a questioning spirit among the colonists. Trade was the lifeblood of the colonial economy. Ships carried goods between America, the West Indies, Africa, and Europe in what became known as the triangular trade. Colonies exported raw materials like furs, lumber, tobacco, and fish. Britain sent back manufactured goods like tools, cloth, and furniture. African slaves were shipped to the Americas to work on plantations. This system, enforced through British Navigation Acts, was designed to benefit the British economy by ensuring that colonial trade served the interests of the empire. However, the colonies resented restrictions that kept them from freely trading with other nations. Smuggling became widespread, and colonial merchants increasingly saw Britain's regulations as burdensome and unfair. Education varied widely depending on region, gender, and class. New England had the highest literacy rates, with many children attending town-supported schools. In the South, education was often limited to the wealthy, who hired private tutors or sent their sons to England. Girls were generally taught domestic skills, though some learned to read and write. Life in the colonies was physically demanding. Most people lived on farms or in small towns. Houses were simple, food was seasonal, and survival required hard work. But the colonies also offered opportunities for land ownership, religious freedom, and participation in community life that were rare in Europe. Though the colonies thrived, discontent was brewing beneath the surface. As generations passed, many colonists began to see themselves less as British subjects and more as Americans. A growing middle class of artisans, merchants, and landowners had little patience for distant royal governors and restrictive trade laws. The wide availability of land fostered independence, and the experience of self-rule through town meetings and colonial assemblies created a belief in local power. Still, for many decades, the colonies remained loyal to Britain. That would begin to change with a war that started far from colonial shores. The French and Indian War. Life in the colonies was rich with opportunity, yet shaped by hardship. Over time, the spirit of self-reliance and independence began to grow. But the colonies were still under British rule, and as the British Empire expanded and tightened its grip, tensions would flare. Next, we'll explore the growing cracks in the relationship between Britain and her American colonies, starting with a costly war that would change everything.